Welcome back to the HydroLuna Series, talking about skills and knowledge needed to help bring life to Earth's moon, Luna. Thank you for coming along the ride with me, and please consider subscribing if you have not already, and thank you to my long-term subscribers for sticking around. So today we're going to talk about hydroponics, so that is growing plants without soil in nutrients and water. And I promise this is not going to be a boring topic, and I'll even discuss some sci-fi examples of what they got right and what they got wrong. Now, in preparation for this video, I actually have a homemade hydroponic system, as well as a commercial off-the-shelf system, a COT system for hydroponics. And I think, one of the few people in the community that actually just grows normal stuff. But for me, normal is strawberries, tomatoes, basically anything that catches my eye. Right now I have some lavender because somebody gave me some heirlooms for that. And I never used to talk like this until about a year and a half ago when I started growing things in hydroponics. And some of the community that grow fruits and vegetables realize, like, oh yeah, you're into that, okay. And there are some great communities online. If you're interested in those, please reach out via the comment section below, or you can reach out directly to me on Discord at any time, or I also have a Twitter page and stuff like that, and Reddit and things. There's many ways to get a hold of me, whether you want to do it in public or a one-on-one conversation. I'll gladly have that with you. So why is hydroponics needed? Well, for starters, we have to overcome the factor of having to truck up all the food. Food that is sent up to space currently is usually a weight restrained issue. And so what has happened is that most things that go up there are pureed into pastes, or they're dehydrated, usually flash frozen, and some other methodologies, and they have a weird flavor. Now, fun little nuance here. If you're in a pure oxygenated environment, your tongue is actually not very well versed in anything besides spicy and to a lesser extent some of the other flavors. But hot sauce is one of the most commonly requested things when folks are up into space. It basically, their noses dry out and their tongues get numb, essentially, is the description. Scientifically, I'm sure there's more specifics. But growing fresh fruit and vegetables will certainly improve morale. And also you could grow some herbs and spices to help overcome some of those factors, like the specific palate that changes as you get up there. And you're on 1/6 of Earth's gravity on Luna. So how does the moon and the lunar environment kind of change these factors? Well, the fun part is with hydroponics is that it doesn't change that much. Hydroponics is actually a very weird science, I would say, and it is by far one of the strangest experiences to see a plant just growing into substrate and then continue to grow past the little piece of felt that you're using into water, and it just sits there. And many different kinds of plants are actually fine. In fact, they thrive too well. I'm going to go into that in a minute. But that water is consumed by the process. Over time, you will have to deal with algae and other things, because one of the biggest things to remember is that light, nutrients, and water equals growth, equals things that you might not want to grow in that water. So with a hydroponic setup, the closed environments that you would want to have on a lunar base make a lot of sense. You would want the equivalent of a high-tech PVC pipe with a bunch of holes drilled into it, and then the plants grown into it, with as much a blocking of the light below the plants into the water in the pipes as possible, is the most crude version. Now, I am more of a fan of commercial off-the-shelf technologies that have come up that are far more clean. They're modular and literally more clean. So I like the pan styles, and I actually have myself a system that has 2 tiers of growing area, one's taller than the other, and that helps me with, I can grow smaller plants at the top, and then as they mature, I bring them down, especially, for example, my smaller tomatoes. And right now, of all things, I'm growing a literal full-size lemon tree off of sampled lemons I got from a local restaurant. After trying a couple different variants, I found one that seemed to tuck in real well with the pH of my water and the nutrients that I'm using for everything else. So that's something else with hydroponics, is that it's kind of a mixed bag. You have to face the facts that certain plants will grow better in pH than others, and they will. I'm in a slightly soft water here, just to give you some perspective on the scale. I'm sitting at just around the 7 point, and some pHs are very extreme. So extremes are not going to be welcome, because that would mean more processing for water and everything else. But what I'm getting to is there are some unknown factors if we were to apply these technologies to Luna. For starters, I do not believe low gravity will greatly impact the ability to grow in hydroponics. The roots are already growing once they leave the substrate, just dangling in water. Water, is one of the closest things we have on Earth to a zero gravity environment. Astronauts train; they physically get into specially made suits that simulate being up in space in a massive swimming pool. And you can look that up if you don't believe me. At least here in the United States. But water in general has a unique property to it if you can have enough of it. But some of the unknowns I don't have with the water are twofold. One, the water that we're seeking out in these ice areas that I talked about in the lunar tubes, and also in the craters and other places all around, mined, etc. When it's processed, what is its natural pH going to be, or what is it going to be changed to be for the consumption and for cleaning and for drinking and consuming by the astronauts? And then two, does that process have any additional impacts to the water when it's recycled? So for those who don't know, the ISS is a good sample of this. Almost all water, nearly as close as they can to 100%, they've recycled the water. There is some loss, but it's very small. It's very minimal. For those who don't know, they also don't use water for cooling the exterior sites. They use nitrogen and some other fun stuff because of the properties of water, water can refreeze and other fun things when you have extreme temperatures and then break everything. So hydroponics have to be within an enclosed environment, like habitation, for example. That's if it's livable for humans, it should be relatively good for hydroponics. However, the water itself that is being supplied to the habitation facility may be an issue. If the water has to be prepped, in general, hydroponics consumes a reasonable amount of water. It's in a heated environment to room temperature or just above room temperature. My system, it basically chews through about 2 to 3 gallons of water within a 10-day period. And then remember, I mentioned nutrients earlier. There is a tiny little bit of nutrients that have to go into that water, and it is assumed that some of that is lost in the process as well, consumed by the plants, as well as just lost in some of that water that comes out or evaporates and basically splashes about and things. It's not an exact system. And one of the things that's actually kind of surprising in the sci-fi environment is that a lot of the samples of the hydroponics that they use, they know they need it. They understand that it's necessary. But a lot of them used in spaceships and lunar examples, Mars examples, even Mars habitats, they have like a dedicated biologist. This is a very common trait. Even the movie The Martian was based around that biology expert. And honestly, if I can do it, you can do it. And if we can all do it, we can train an astronaut that holds multiple advanced degrees. He or she can certainly work on it. And they can be trained on it ahead of time. That's why. So you keep the experts at home, in my opinion, unless there is some breakthrough that is beyond anything I can imagine. We figure out a way to grow so many plants, they generate their own oxygen, and that's like the secondary oxygen source of the entire base. We're relying on this food, like for a Mars mission, for the 2-year turnaround or 1-year turnaround, depending on when it is. It would make sense to have a biologist if they find suddenly an issue with the systems that worked on Earth, worked in the lunar environment, and then they get to Mars and, oh my goodness, we're not growing anything, it's not working, the supply mission failed. What do we do? What do we do? Those I totally understand. But once we have a launch schedule where there's multiple launches a year to a lunar base that's semi-permanent or permanent, in my opinion, it is everyone's duty to do hydroponics. If there's somebody who specializes in that as a niche, great, but I would expect them, in my estimation, I would say that they would also be doing other duties. And the reason why is because a lot of the work in hydroponics is like, you look at it once a day. You make sure everything's going the way it goes. And even my basic commercial off the shelf system has alerts that send to my phone about when it has an issue. So if its water level is low or the lights aren't turning on, I've had both of them in the past, I can even turn those on and reschedule the sites from wherever I want. It connects via Wi-Fi. And if the systems that they have do not have alerts in the command center or control systems and maintenance rooms and stuff, I would be shocked. And that's kind of my point, is that all crews should know how to fill the water bucket and resupply the hydroponic system with water. All crews should know how to check the light and make sure it's connected correctly and make sure there's no moisture in the lights. Really basic things. This is not what people picture in their heads of this advanced system, where there is this specialized thing. People are pulling out pipettes and putting in special chemicals into each one of the plants. And there's hundreds of plants, and monitoring and documenting each and every one. Sure, maybe at first just to study what happens, or maybe the study regolith contamination. So one of the big problems with these bases is going to be dust management. No matter how good they get, a small amount of the strata that's around on the moon may actually get into the base, and then if a tiny bit of that gets into the room, what does it do to the plants? Does it ruin them? Does it dramatically change the water or whatever? But if you set up a system, you absolutely could have it pre-rigged on Earth, set up with everything ready to go, sealed up, and then it's unpacked on the lunar base. And it's obviously an afterthought at first, and then it gains value over time. Nutrients are not an issue. Nutrients are measured in teaspoons. It's a very, very small amount of nutrients. Milliliters is another way people measure their nutrients out, and you can get wet or dry nutrients. For the work on the moon, I would recommend dry nutrients unless proven otherwise, for obvious reasons due to weight, and also because you can vacuum pack what I would do is vacuum pack every 10-day package, so you can measure how many you've used and then request more from Earth. And we're talking about a pound of nutrients would be enough to keep sustaining a room-sized operation, growing all sorts of different things. But fruit do take up more. I have seen that with my tomatoes, where I have multiple plants that are growing large amounts of tomatoes, and they do consume more water and therefore consume more nutrients. The more nutrients you add to the water, the more water consumed, the more you will burn through you'll create a higher burn rate on your plants. You can scale that back by just controlling the plants by you have to. They grow so well. So of all things, basil, because this is probably the question in your head now. I'm trying to jump ahead to that. Basil, tomatoes grow extraordinarily well as well. Catnip, of all things. Lemon balm, that grows extremely well. And additionally, I've had a lot of luck with plants that you wouldn't expect, but like strawberries. That's one of my favorites to go back to, but they're way more maintenance heavy. So I think the morale gain of fruits is very valuable. And even like staples such as tomatoes in general can also grow that way as well. So yeah, I guess fruit heavy is a fair way to put it. I would say that a lot of what you grow, I'm still trying to get the lemon plant to finally get to a sustainable level. But the more you grow, the more you learn about what works, and very simple technologies like treadles and metal little clamps that go onto the box where it grows are very useful. Very simple things like you grow at home here on Earth. And one of the easiest ways to get people to train on this is probably issue one of these hydroponic systems to each one of the candidates that wants to go up, and tell them you have to grow this at home. We will send like a professional to help set it up for you. If it takes, I don't know, 2 hours to put together a two level one, and it does it itself. Guides you through every step of the way. There's multiple of these brands. Mine's a Rise brand, if that helps you at all, if you're curious. But I think that would help a lot with understanding the system, and people just going, oh, this is it. It's not very complicated. It's not very advanced in any way, shape, or form. And I think it would add a pride and ownership. So a lot of the crew would have higher morale. For example, if a resupply is delayed right now, in the current conditions, without being able to grow anything, fruits and vegetables and such would be dramatically lessened. And we've heard from bases that are like McMurdo down in Antarctica about how important it is for when that first plane lands after the long winter. A year on the ice is my cited source for the crews there. For the folks that stayed over, as they say, from the winter into the rest of the year. Basically, when the first plane lands, they're so excited not because of new people, that's part of it, sure, but they immediately go to the bushels of food and they cite the fruits and vegetables that are coming off of that plane. So diet and general health, aside from the morale and the psychological gains and the pride and ownership from seeing this develop, it is also important as diet and general health. So extreme conditions are absolutely a big part of why this is done, is because hydroponics can be grown in places that normally nothing can grow. We can't grow things on the moon that we know of with the soil available. Regolith is tiny little teeth, essentially, as some descriptions have put it. It's sharp stone. And unless we find dramatically different soils, like we find actual soils in the lava tubes or something, who knows what we'll find, but I doubt it. Being able to grow things is going to be critical, at least at first, from hydroponics, no matter what. It has a reduced weight, so in order to deploy it, you simply would deploy pre-staged modular containers inside the ship going up, and then they would be unpacked once you're there. And I would once again have every crew member, every single candidate, you want to go on this trip, you got to get the module deployed to your home, and you already have worked on it. It's boring by the time you go up there. You fully understand the system. And just like children in a school who have to come in with the unbroken egg, they're handed an egg and they have to care for it for a couple days, I think it would be a good sample. It's just, you have to take pictures of what the status is of your system at home and prove you grew something. And if you didn't, you go back through the training again. Having every single person be able to do the simple and basic tasks and understand the space needed, understand the system is critical to me. Now, there are some downsides to having a system like this. It does take up a bit of space on the location, but you can tier stack. So a system, so the modular bays, lights, modular bays, lights. And a modular bay is, they're like the equivalent of like a Rubbermaid container with a bunch of holes in the top of it. Just to be crystal clear here, we're not talking about advanced technology. Although the system that would go up would have to have a good seal on top of it, at least when it was going up. the extremes of taking off and going into atmosphere, exiting atmosphere, and then going on the long transit, and then come on the way back, landing. So, but once it's there, the space that is needed and also the need for power for the pumps, very small amount. I've estimated that my system is taking up about 200 watts to 300 watts maximum at its peak. And I will note, though, there is all spectrum LED lighting on there. And it is on about 16 to 17 hours a day. I do change it based on the growth, if it's overgrowing or growing too little and things like that, new plants. And it is on a timer. And one of the things I actually like about it is that I leave it running when it's dark out. So it's a free light, essentially. I'm using air quotes there for free, though. But the entire system takes under 300 watts. And that also includes fans, which do not normally come with it. So for those who don't know, plants have the equivalent of a sweat. They sweat, which I did not know until I started doing hydroponics. Normally, when things are grown outside, this is not an issue. Unless you're growing corn, for example, and you have to shake the stalks. For those who have grown corn before, the top part descends down and fertilizes the rest of the corn stalks. And they cross-pollinate and everything, whatever. Aside from things like that are extremes, if you don't have high wind events during the right times of the year, really, you leave the plant alone with water, and ideally, at least the soil's okay with nutrients, you're good to go, right? But with this system, especially when it's inside, it's a little bit inclement weather outside with barely any atmosphere on Luna. You need fans. The fans are basically like giant, computer fans, like larger than computer fans. They're all-purpose fans. You put one on each tier. It hangs off the lights, and it turns on a timer with the rest of the system. You have to add these fans for whatever reason. Most brands do not include the fans. The fans are, I don't know, $15. I think I paid for a pair of them on Amazon. And for whatever reason, that's how it is. They consume a small amount of juice at most. They run extremely slow, but they do blow air through and create the correct climate to allow the plants to operate. In particular, during the lighting, when the all spectrum lighting goes on, and basically turns the plants into sweat boxes, essentially, when they're trying to do their thing. The wind blowing through makes it all possible. It greatly increased the growing potential of my site. So, heirloom seeds and trial and error. There are companies that sell different fruits and vegetables, and I'm sticking to those, especially because of what we're talking about, him basically bringing life to a moon, right? You will need to develop those seeds on Earth and determine which ones are suitable for your system, the pH levels that are anticipated, the nutrients you're using, and do they play nice with others on the same tiers? So if you have a plant that rapidly grows, one of the other things I grow, as I have grown in the past, and I'm not currently, is stevia. So the sweet sugar plant. You would really want to have that on its own in its own section, with a few of those just battling it out for space. They have a habit of just growing like wild weeds, is the best description I can offer. They grow out like they're trying to take space from other plants. And they're very frustrating to try to control. I have tried putting up a treadle, for example, but it just keeps growing out of control no matter what you do with it. So I would prefer to have that in its own modular space, its own box, with its own lighting controls, because I do recognize the value of having a sugar substitute being available to the crew and the morale boost, but it would need to be monitored and handled differently than most of the other plants. And all plants have different height requirements, by the way. So a system that allows you to adjust the lighting height is very useful, but I have to understand the space requirements of this area as well. So it might be better to just have the lights at a reasonable height and then keep crimping down the plants. In hydroponics, they call it pinching, where you pinch the top parts of the plants as gently as possible, at the right times With heirloom seeds, though, you would develop your seeds that are good to go. Seeds you can trust, seeds you know, and you have a controlled environment where you've seen them grow before, you've documented it, and then this is where the professionals would come in before they go up. And then you have the actual a deployment site up on Luna, where you have normal people, once again astronauts and scientists and technicians that are brought up there, and they've all had experience with hydroponics, right? Didn't they all get a system to go home with and some seeds and closer to mission and stuff with these type of seeds, so they know what they're dealing with. pH adjustment is something to monitor. The crew would be trained in that. It's literally a strip you shove in there and then you take a look. I usually use 2 strips because I don't trust them to always give me the correct things. So that's the most important things. And I also want to note that nutrients are weird. So you have to decide which of the bays gets the nutrients watered first. So the pump pumps to a specific bay, and then it goes around that bay, cycles around, and then it drops to another one, and then it drops, and if you have additionals, it drops to even more. So the first bays to get nutrients tend to be your most temperamental plants that really, really desperately need it. So for example, on mine, it goes to the top, and then it cycles around in a big U shape, and then it drops to the lower bay. And the bays that are at the top, I've used for strawberries because they are extraordinarily temperamental. They're worth the effort, but I've found that I get like a couple pulls out of them, and then I have to remove them and throw them out. And that would be additional biomass on the Luna that you would add to a pile of compost that you would use for other things, probably for experiments. But because every single thing up there is incredibly valuable, at least, especially at first. But yeah, so that's kind of some of the things that are really interesting. Another thing to note is that I mentioned before, water plus nutrients plus light equals algae and other things you won't want. However, in certain circumstances, algae may actually be a benefit. So I've heard other people having videos and discussing and releasing papers on the idea of using algae to feed people up in space. I don't think on a short term that's going to make sense, but in the longer term, I think people may get used to it or supplement their diet with a type of algae mixed in with other foods and such. And who knows, maybe you'd have a hydroponic system that feeds back into an algae tank, and then it feeds back into the hydroponics or something like that. And it's purposely cultivating both, like having plants that are symbiotic with such a system instead of we see it when you're doing a system like this, you see it as a threat. It creates a bunch of mess that you have to clean more often, and it's just a whole thing. Now, before I get into the pop culture references, I want to just get a couple common I bet questions people have out of the way about this system. Yes, it is easy to do. Yes, I think your family will think you're crazy at first, but once they see it actually succeed, they'll understand. And yes, plants grow far faster in hydroponics than you expect. It's like you put them on an accelerator, especially plants that grow only once. Do note that you will have to harvest them quicker than you anticipate and then throw them out quicker than you anticipate. There is a clean out process every 6 months or so. It's up to you about how often you want to do it. Do understand it's a little bit annoying for the plants. They don't seem to care that much until they do. And the plants kind of grow their in each one of the bays. They grow together. So there's like this fabric underneath inside the water, and it's kind of a good thing to clean them out, but at the same time, you can accidentally kill the plants or weaken the plants. And also there's an additional amount of water that will flood back into the reservoir tank. So I purposely kept this simple, but there is a tank full of water. That's all it is. Congrats. Now you know the whole system. You got a pumping out of the reservoir tank to the upper bay, drops into the lower bay via tube. Then it drops back into the reservoir tank. If you have additional bays, and you can do this horizontally as well, just answer that question real quick. And the biggest problem I could see on the moon or at home would be pets or family, or a case of the Luna, co-workers and such kicking the system or knocking it over. However, it is considerably heavy, and the reservoir tank is at the bottom for a reason, so it's heavy on the bottom. So it's harder to knock it over. But it is possible if he went full speed, if an adult went full speed into it and fell into it or something, I don't know. So have recovery in mind, in particular on Luna, where water is absolutely critical. I would recommend having some sort of catch-all pan below you, and then maybe a pump that activates, or some other system that kind of catches that water that in that specific room. So if there is a accident where a couple gallons is on the ground, it's not a disaster. You can immediately pull it back up, and then you don't have to tell everybody they can't take showers for a week or something. Anyway, and the water has to keep flowing. So if there's a power outage for a considerable amount of time and you don't have a battery backup, the plants will start dying, because they're literally just living in the water full of nutrients, and that has to keep pumping in fresh nutrients through the system. Okay. One last thing that came up. I'm sure I suspect will come up. Nutrients kind of just sit in. I thought that they would be like pumped in via another tank. They don't. They just sit in the reservoir tank. You dump in your nutrients. It's a very small amount, like think teaspoon level for every 10 days. Okay. So in pop culture, there's a few different examples of such things. And like I said before, a lot of times there's always like an expert in it. There's somebody who's like graduate level, college level discussions that are like the expert on it, and only they touch the plants. In The Expanse, there is a pivotal character for a whole season that revolves around his expertise. And one of the frustrating things I had with that, after now going through the process of learning hydroponics, is that he analyzes the hydroponics of a failing colony, and he reads the line. He's like, the lines don't have nutrients in them, and he explains that there's nothing, no nutrients left in the water. And he's basically saying, oh, they've got days to go. They don't know it yet, but the colony's dead. There's not going to be any food, right? Now, there's a couple things I wanted to point out, other than just, the foodstuffs, which were obviously pulled apart. And there is another character who stole a bunch of them and whatever, hoarding them. But there should be secondary methods to have food aside from hydroponics. But specifically getting back to those comments made by the character, the hydroponics are not that rough around the edges. So I told you I'd give it nutrients every 10 days. There are times where I forgot an entire week. I forgot to give nutrients, and I'm going back through the app, and it's like telling me like, oh, you haven't done this in 8 days, 9 days. And I'm like, oh, and I'm back there putting them in. Did all the plants die and everything? No. Did I see there was a little bit of problems where the fruit weren't getting as big, or the leaves themselves got a little on the edges got a little messed up? Yes. Yeah. Plants are not just going to keel over and die instantaneously just because they don't get nutrients. There's no nutrients in the water. It's not like there's no oxygen in the air. I'm going to die now. I think what's more likely in a pure oxygenated environment is that you're going to have to figure out how to get them CO to make the plants survive. So honestly, sitting in crew habitation is the best possible solution for them, or being in the path. So having a room, like almost like a broom, not a broom closet, but like a small storage room. It's just not very elegant. It's very thin. And then 2 rooms, habitational rooms, are on both sides of it with bunk beds or something. And all of the air coming out of those habitations is flowing through that small room, and then it continues on through the air system. Disclaimer, I'm not an expert on any of this, but I think that would be more than enough. The only problem then would be the plants. I would want to have windows into that room so somebody would notice if they're dying off or having problems or flooding the room or something. Another example is For All Mankind. For All Mankind, I think, did a better job where they covered it. There was still the plant expert, but other people were helping her. And also, the plants were kept in a room right next to where all the crew worked, which I thought was a good move. They used it in Mars habitation as a good example. they had a little too much fun in that room. But what they did also cover to me was the stacking of the plants in the correct way, where you're trying to maximize your space and utilizing it to good effect. Now, I will not comment on the later episodes, what they were doing with the plants as well. I'm not commenting on that at all. But I'm going to stick to the hydroponics that were sustaining the colony and the nutrients and such they were feeding the colony by getting nutrients themselves. And I think that they did a good job of covering a lot of the topics that were important on a small scale and a larger scale. So I think that For All Mankind on Apple Plus is a good example of if you're trying to get an image of how it would actually operate. There is some little bits in there from the later seasons. The Martian. So The Martian is another one on Mars. I know we're talking about the Luna, but still, I can only work with what I have. The Martian has chosen, instead of using hydroponics, they use soil. So the character that is stuck there is a biology expert. I'm sure he figured it out better than I can. However, I did want to note the fertilizer situation. So he was using human fertilizer that was purified through the flash heating process or something like that. And I just wanted to point out that I think you could research how to do that with the same situation, same scenario for the moon, but with hydroponics, if you were mixing it with other nutrients. However, I want to stress that you probably would never put yourself into that scenario if you're in hydroponics, because once again, nutrients are very, very small. They can be vacuum packed. And to my knowledge, even if they're exposed to hard vacuum, as long as they're inside a sealed container and it's not negative 200 degrees or flash overheating and setting everything on fire in the room or something, I don't think you would be in a scenario where you'd have to worry about that, because the nutrients themselves do not need, to my knowledge, once they're vacuum packed, would not need oxygen to survive. We're talking about a dry ingredient package that's shipped through the mail and exposed to the ozone or the cleaning of the mail and such things, and they have no problem. So and they're in sealed containers like that. So I think that a lot of his issues would be resolved there. However, his bigger problem would be keeping the water supply going, which somehow he was getting the water going for his plants as well. You saw him use rocket fuel to make it rain or something like that. I have no idea if that's plausible in general anyway, but I'm going to trust that the movie magic and also I'm sure some people who spoke about it, and the guy who originally made the posts about the Martian. The original story was like a whole bunch of Reddit posts, and he kind of combined them into a book, and then the book was made into a movie. It's my understanding of what happened. I assume they did their research. But I do not think hydroponics would be good or bad in that situation, other than just the water control. I think you could mix nutrients with any kind of water, and figure that out, especially because potatoes are nuts. Potatoes will grow in anything. I have not tried hydroponics and potatoes, but right before I did this, I Googled it because I'm trying to go through the pop culture references, and no issues. Okay, so Mission to Mars is my next one on my list. I am going to basically skip this one. It is presented that the character Luke was living in a greenhouse and that the plants kept him alive, and there's nowhere near enough plants to sustain a human being, an adult human. It is a neat concept. I wish they would have explored it more of like, oh, well, I did this, and this, plus I happen to have this greenhouse. It would have been pretty neat. And it highlighted to me, they used it like a traditional greenhouse, like on Earth or something. It kind of feels like it is. If they would have had a stack system of hydroponics and there was an immense amount of plants around the man, and they even showed maybe some cans of food, and he said they're empty, and said like, oh yeah, I've been running, I'm just about out, I'm completely sustained off these plants now in the past few weeks, just waiting for you guys. That would have been a little more believable. I wish Hollywood would be a little more honest with that. And real world. So there are extreme research sites that have used hydroponics to do different tests. There are, as I mentioned before, the ISS, which tests plants in space and both soil substrate and also water substrates and such, for hydroponics as well. And I think they highlight the fact that it is possible. It is something that I want to stress, though, that what is used in extremely low gravity or something like that is a little different than 1/6 Earth's gravity on Luna. And I also want to stress again that plants need to grow ideally in a place like humans live in, so the conditions are the same, like as if they're on Earth. The same conditions that you want, they want, is one of the experiences I've had. And I haven't had a lot of issues following that philosophy of give them light, give them water, give them nutrients, just like anybody wants, and they'll treat you right. And plants do react very quickly under hydroponics. I think I mentioned that earlier, but if you skipped ahead, just know that that is one of the biggest things that's fascinating about the project. I highly encourage anybody thinking about it to actually take the leap, get a small system, test it out, and see how much fun you have. Ideally, I love the systems where you can start with one level and then upgrade it to 2 or even 3 levels, because then you can see how much your commitment is, and can I do this? It kind of gives you that confidence. And I still feel that the best way to handle this is not through having an expert on board, having the expert back on Earth, testing all these systems relentlessly, setting these systems up with the people that are preparing to go for months and months, so they have, this is like second nature to them. It's the same as microwaving popcorn is grabbing a bucket, throwing water in, and then throwing some nutrients in with a spoon and be done with it. I think that's the most critical thing. And then seeing all the different things that come up and noises that they should be making and shouldn't be making, and, factoring in those things. And enjoying the fact that you get the confidence in growing your own stuff year round, which is important. So that's going to do it for this one. Again, thank you to my long-term subscribers for sticking around with me. Please consider subscribing if you have not already. And yeah. Happy New Year, everyone.